Welcome back, Cubs. Direwolf here. And today, we need to talk about fascism. You've very likely heard the word fascism, or heard fascist thrown around as an insult. However, the vast majority of the time that the words are used nowadays, they are used incorrectly. Here's an example. This is a video from ContraPoints on fascist propaganda.
To begin, let's take a look at what fascism is. Contemporary fascists share three core beliefs. 1. People of European heritage are or ought to constitute a biological, cultural, and political unity known as the white race, sometimes dog-whistled as Western culture. 2. Jews are masterminding the destruction of the white race through multiculturalism and non-white immigration, a plot that fascists call white genocide or ethnic replacement. 3. The only way to save the white race is to establish a white homeland, or ethno-state, from which non-whites and degenerates must be purged.
Did you catch her mistake? She meant to list identifying factors of contemporary fascists, but instead she listed identifying factors of white supremacists. This shows that she believes that fascism includes white supremacy. That is incorrect. Here is the actual definition of fascism. According to Merriam-Webster's dictionary, a political philosophy, movement, or regime, such as the fascisti, that exalts the nation and often race above the individual and stands upon a centralized autocratic government, headed by a dictatorial leader, severe economic and social regimentation, and forcible suppression of opposition. Notice in this definition it says that it exalts nation and then often race above the individual, which means that racial supremacy, though common in fascism, is not a requirement. I'd also like to point out the white race is not mentioned in this definition one time, because any race and any nation can be fascistic, because fascism is a political philosophy, movement, or regime that can be held by any ethnic group. Now don't get me wrong, this is not a response video to ContraPoints. According to my own very unscientific Twitter poll, a fair number of people who watch my channel, even after I foot stomped the correct answer, still opted to say that they did not know. And it's not your fault. There's multiple definitions of what fascism is out there, and the word's been misused so much it's lost all meaning. George Orwell wrote in 1944 that the word fascism is almost entirely meaningless. Almost any English person would accept bully as a synonym for fascist. And if you're a member of Antifa, fascist means anyone who disagrees with you. And Professor Richard Griffith of the University of Wales wrote in 2005 that fascism is the most misused and overused word of our time. Fascist is sometimes applied to post-World War II organizations and ways of thinking that academics more commonly term neo-fascism. Neo-fascism is a post-World War II ideology that includes significant elements of fascism. It's also a synonym for the term contemporary fascism, which is what ContraPoints referred to, which, as I quoted, is any group that is significantly similar to fascism. Remember that. I'll be coming back to it later. But before we start comparing other groups to fascists, let's find out what fascists are, look at their history, and look at other definitions. The word fascism comes from the Italian term fascismo, which is derived from fascisio, which I'm probably pronouncing horribly. I apologize, meaning a bundle of rods, and ultimately from another Latin word that was later given to a political organization in Italy known as the Fasces, which were groups similar to guilds or syndicates, according to Mussolini's own account. The Fascist Revolutionary Party, or the PFR, was founded in Italy in 1915. In 1919, Mussolini founded the group that in 2 years would be called the National Fascist Party. This was the first fascist political movement that went by this name. So when someone refers to fascism, they're referring to the political philosophy of this movement and this regime. However, Italian fascism did not exist in a bubble. Historians have traced the ideological roots of fascism back to the 1880s, and in particular to the fin de siècle theme at the time. The theme was based on a revolt against materialism, rationalism, positivism, the bourgeoisie society, and democracy. Their generation supported emotionalism, irrationalism, subjectivism, and vitalism. These political ideas were pervasive throughout Europe, and were influential in Germany, France, as well as Italy. These core political ideas helped create the Nazi fascist and the Italian fascist, however they are very different. They are similar, of course, in that they both fit the definition of fascism. Whereas Mussolini said, "Race, it is a feeling, not reality. 95% at least. Nothing will ever make me believe that biologically pure races can be shown to exist today. National pride has no need of the delirium of race." Mussolini's fascist party, the origin of the word fascism, was not based on race, but nationalism. And even though other fascist movements of the time, such as the Nazis, did commit their atrocities in the name of racial purity and white supremacy, it does not mean that those things are what made them fascist. So what are the identifying factors of a fascist movement? First and foremost, extreme nationalism to the point of isolationism. In my personal opinion, nationalism in and of itself is not a bad thing, but as the old adage goes, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. According to World Fascism, a historical encyclopedia, Volume 1, nationalism is the main foundation of fascism. The fascist view of a nation is of a single organic entity that binds people together by their ancestry, and is a natural unifying force of people. Fascism seeks to solve economic, political, and social problems by achieving millenarian national rebirth, exalting the nation or race above all else, and promoting cults of unity, strength, and purity. Again, I emphasize, the mythological rebirth of the nation, wherein the nation returns to the hands of the quote-unquote patriots, or whoever the fascists see as being the true owners of the country, and the removal of anyone not in that category or not willing to submit to the fascist ideas, is dependent and subject to the point of view of the fascist group. So in the case of a fascist black nationalist group, the true owners of the country, or state, or city will be black instead of being white. Or in the case of the Italian fascist in 1920, your racial background did not determine whether or not you were a patriot. And yes, this category does include white supremacist neo-Nazis, however white supremacy is not a requirement for you to be a fascist. The second tenet of fascism is totalitarianism. Fascism promotes and establishes a totalitarian state. It opposes liberal democracy, rejects multi-party systems, and supports a one-party state. The Doctrine of Fascism states, the fascist concept of the state is all-embracing. Outside, no human or spiritual value can exist, much less have value. What this would look like in a group that does not have power but is fascistic would be a group that uses our third point, political violence, against anyone that is outside of the group. You either conform to their way of thinking, or you are the enemy, and they will oppose you violently. This violence is not directed only towards liberals or conservatives, but towards both. According to the book Ethics and Political Theory, fascism rejects the assertion that violence is automatically negative in nature and views political violence, war, and imperialism as means that can achieve national rejuvenation. That is to say that fascists are willing to use the political tactics of the other political groups that they are opposed to for their own gains. Because let's be honest, fascism, which is rooted in the removal of personal freedoms and autonomy for the sake of conformity, is a pretty tough sell to those who are not indoctrinated. Robert Paxton wrote in The Anatomy of Fascism that fascism is a form of political behavior marked by obsessive preoccupation with community decline, humiliation, or victimhood, and compensatory cults of unity, energy, and purity, in which a mass-based party of committed nationalist militants working in an uneasy but effective collaboration with traditional elites abandon democratic liberties and pursue with redemptive violence, without ethical or legal restraints, goals of internal cleansing and external expansion. What's important to note here is the preoccupation of fascists that they are victims, which they also indoctrinate into their members. And their victimhood does not have to be one of actual violence, but that their nation is being taken over by another political group, which is in itself the violent act that they are responding to, which gives them a moral basis for all their violent actions. A great example of this concept would be Antifa claiming that because America has been taken over by, in their mind, fascist, the mere fact that they exist and are in control is an act of violence, which is what they use for their ethical basis for using violence against those who have not yet used actual violence against them. Now, I'm not calling Antifa literal fascist, but you could say that they have this one thing in common, and possibly more. But I haven't gotten there yet, Cubs. Slow down. We'll get there in a moment. The fourth identifying factor of fascism is their economic policy. Fascism presents itself as a third option, alternative to both internal socialism and free market capitalism. While fascism opposes mainstream socialism, it sometimes regards itself as a type of national socialism, to highlight their commitment to national solidarity and unity. But by most measurable factors, National Socialism is basically just socialist economic policy with the added change that a person is not only working for themselves, themselves, but they are working to benefit the nation and its goals. You could also say that fascist economic policy is socialist economic policy without the demonizing of the class differences. So to sum it up, the four main identifying factors of fascism: extreme nationalism, totalitarianism with strong indoctrination, and political violence used to silence all dissent, with the false victimhood mentality, with the goal of making a single-party system with only one point of view, and lastly, with a largely socialistic economic policy that is driven by national unity, that creates a state that seeks to mediate between the economic classes rather than pitting them against each other. That is fascism. It is a very simplified version of fascism, as much as I can fit into a 10 to 15 minute video. There's a lot more depth and nuance into what fascism is and their history, but I can't put it all in this video. But for the basic understanding of fascism, those are the main 4 points. So when people say that Trump and those who support Trump are fascist, they are wrong. Yes, they are nationalist, but they do not fit the rest of those categories. But let's come back to that term, neo-fascism. A neo-fascist group would be an ideology that includes significant elements of fascism. What is significant elements? For the sake of arguments, let's say 2 out of the 4 categories. 50% of the elements of fascism as I listed would be a significant amount in my opinion. And then let's look at the group Antifa. First, are they nationalistic? No, they're not. They show no national pride or pride in an ethnic group and show no intent of trying to rebirth the nation. They are more anarchist than they are nationalist. Second, do they believe in totalitarianism? Keep in mind there are some differences between a totalitarian when they are in power and when they are not in power. For instance, Antifa is not in a position to make a centralized government with an autocratic leader or hierarchy. But we can look at their tactics and judge whether or not they also share the same tactics as a totalitarian regime, which is outlined in Merriam-Webster's dictionary as of or related to a political regime based on subordination of the individual to the state and strict control of all aspects of the life and productivity capacity of the nation, especially by coercive measures such as censorship and terrorism. I believe it's obvious from the multiple and intentional attacks from Antifa on peaceful rallies and the destruction of property and their opposition to the freedom of speech that use the same tactics as a totalitarian regime of censorship and terrorism. So if they had a coup, who do you believe they would put in power? Obviously someone who believes in those same tactics. So I'd say that Antifa is totalitarian, which relates to my third point that they do use political violence to silence any form of dissent. They don't only oppose white supremacists and neo-Nazis, they also oppose liberal democracy and capitalism. And just like fascists, they justify their actions, their violence, on a victim narrative. And they've been indoctrinated by social justice ideology through propaganda in schools that has taught them that anyone who's not a straight white male is oppressed. They've been taught that people disagreeing with you and words are violence, and that inequity based on merit is evil. So you can put a check mark next to political violence fueled by a false victim narrative as well. And the fourth category is the fascist economic policy of National Socialism. Strictly speaking, Antifa as a group is not National Socialist. They are predominantly anarcho-communists. So they don't get a check mark for fascist economic policy. However, they did get 2 out of 4. Antifa may not be literal fascist, however they do have a significant amount in common with fascism. The only difference between them and the neo-Nazis is the neo-Nazis have nationalism and they are less violent, at least currently. However, if Antifa keeps feeding their victim narrative, they will soon become just as violent, if not far worse. The fascists are more like the Bolsheviks. They use the same tactics as the fascists, but they don't have the same political ideology. The big takeaway from this video should be what fascism actually is and what it is not. And more importantly, most of the people that the regressive left and Antifa are calling fascist are less fascist than Antifa and the regressive left are. Thank you for watching. Please discuss in the comment section. If you think I'm wrong, please tell me and I'll discuss it with you. Again, this video was sponsored by Virtual Shield. They help protect your anonymity online. Check out the affiliate link in the description of the video. Direwolf out.